what is the meaning of the word day in Genesis 1 and 2? Is the Bible literally teaching a day is 24 hours long, or is it literally teaching that a day is a long period of time? Now, you were one of the translators on the NIV Bible, and you've taught Hebrew, and you know 7 different languages, at least, the last time I was counting. And so help us out, but put it in the cookies on the lower shelf so my mother can understand, what is the Bible literally teaching about the word day?
Well, John, it's a delight to be with you and also to talk to your mother, too. But it is a delight to revise your question a little bit. I think it should be, what are the meanings of the word day? I'm the one that generally argues there's only one meaning to a word as an author uses it. But in this particular context, of course, in Genesis, he dares to use the word in at least 3, maybe 4 different ways. The word day, yom, in Hebrew appears over 500 times in the King James Bible. And according to the Englishman's Hebrew Concordance, there are over 58 different ways that it's handled. That doesn't mean it's arbitrary. It means context is king. And therefore, I think that needs to be taken into account. So day in verse 5 is daylight. Day in the 4th day is when God creates 24-hour days. In Genesis 2:4, there it uses it in a prepositional clause in the day that the Lord God created, and sums up the whole creative activity, which would be like our way of saying in the day of so-and-so's presidency or in the day of Abraham Lincoln. So the answer is you must hold carefully to the context.
Okay, so why do you think that God is saying then, or teaching us, that it's a long period of time? You got 3 options there.
Yeah, I think that each one of them has to be taken very carefully. The early church fathers and the medieval fathers were very, very careful on this point, in which it was regarded as a longer period of time, but always for different reasons. There was, in Augustine's, or Augustine, depending on your level of sophistication, but in Augustine or Augustine's way of saying it, he said we had a day 1, a day 2, and a day 3 before we had any 24-hour days created. And therefore, you need to be very careful that there were no people here, so it's not a human perspective at that point, it's a divine perspective. After all, we have astronauts going round and round the globe, and from their perspective, they see a number of sunrises and sunsets, evening and morning, evening and morning, evening and morning, evening and morning. Now, God is a little bit further out, I would suspect, than our solar system. Therefore, that needs to be taken into account too. It seems that that wasn't the point on which the biblical text was anxious to make its real point. Where the biblical text wanted to come down was, it was God who created the whole thing. In the beginning, boom, God. He made the whole thing. So the argument that really needs to be joined with modern society is there an absolute beginning or is it relative? And this biblical text says, look, it's absolute. There was nothing and except God, and he made, he created. So that's how I would handle it.
All right, that's a good start. Let's come to you, Ken. We're friends, and sometimes friends can disagree, and you have a different point of view. Let's stick, because we're going to have the scientists talk about that beginning point in another program, but right now we're talking about the biblical evidence. Why do you believe that the word day, yom, is 24 hours and not a long period of time?
Well, first of all, I've got here a copy of what's considered one of the most up-to-date and respected Hebrew and Aramaic lexicons of the Old Testament by Kohler and Baumgartner, which I'm sure Dr. Kaiser is familiar with.
Yep.
And when I look up the word day in there, it actually has down there, day of 24 hours, actually has that as a heading. First example is given as Genesis 1:5. In other words, the first day right down there of creation. So, I mean, these guys are Hebraists, and I think they do very well at defining terms properly. Also, if you look on Brown Driver Briggs, which is also a well-respected lexicon, I have the photocopies here of that too. The example of the days being ordinary days is defined by evening and morning and so on. They list all the days of creation in there in Genesis 1. So if I go by, the respected lexicons of people who really understand the Hebrew here, and these are lexicons used in colleges all across this nation, then the days of creation in Genesis are ordinary days. And, I would say there's a number of reasons for that. And by the way, if I can just comment on Dr. Kaiser's comment there about the Church Fathers, we've done a lot of research on the Church Fathers. Actually, the major view of the Church Fathers, of those who commented on Genesis, is 6 ordinary days. And in fact, even Augustine talked about in an instant, creation in an instant, rather than over a period of time. And even he talked about from from looking at the creation of humans, that the universe, the earth, humans are only here for about 6,000 years. In fact, it's only those of the Alexandrian school that you find really were allegorizing Genesis. Most of the others who commented on it specifically were talking about 6 days. And I've got all those quotes here if you want to see them. We could be talking about all sorts of people here.
Yeah,
for
that's
instance,
good. Let's throw it back to Kaiser here, and let's talk about Brown Driver Briggs and some of these folks. What do you say to that?
My answer is that God had not yet created a 24-hour day. So too bad for Brown Driver Briggs and too bad for Keeler Baumgartner, because it specifically says, if we're going to stick with the Bible, God created days on the 4th day. So we got 3 of these yoms, which are not of the 24-hour. Augustine had 4 different views with regard to the day, and he ended up by saying, look, I really don't know. He said, I think an instantaneous is what I prefer, but nevertheless, he goes back and forth, specifically because of the biblical data, which I think has a day 1, 2, and 3, where it's using evening and morning, of course, but that needs to be interpreted according to the context.
Actually, if I can comment there, Augustine wrote a book called Retractions at the end of his life, and talking about the fact that he's fallible and doesn't know everything. And one of the books he commented on that he wasn't sure what he believed about was Genesis. But, I don't believe we should use Augustine there as an authority. But if we look at 18 centuries of biblical scholarship, and if you start talking about Calvin and Luther as well, and Wesley, these guys all believed in 6 literal days, and the earth and the universe, in fact, is only thousands of years old. In fact, they talk about 5,000, 6,000 years old. And one of the things that, I think we should look at here, we should look at, what the context says. That's what Dr. Kaiser said earlier. It's got to be driven by context.
All right, let me bring up the second one. Let's get to that context. There was evening and there was morning, day 1, day 2, day 3, all right? Some folks claim that when there was evening and there was morning, you got a formula attached to the word day that means it's got to be 24 hours. So, Kaiser, what do you say to that?
Well, again, I think it's a context. You can't argue for a evening and morning of a 24-hour day until you get a 24-hour day. The question is, do we trust God? Do we trust the Bible? Did he really make it on the 4th day? Or are we going to try to jump the gun and say, no, he really used the word day here, and day, as we use it commonly, must always mean the same thing. No one is a literalist completely in the sense that everything is literal. After all, Jesus said, or God said, I'm a rock, I'm a fortress, I'm a high tower. Jesus said, I'm the door. At the Eucharist with the communion, he said, this is my body, as he offered the bread to the individuals. I don't know of a Christian who says, yeah, that's literally that. And good for them, because it's context that defines it. Same way evening and morning and day.
What does evening and morning mean then?
I think the completion of the first creative act of God and the inception of the next creative act of God. He is sort of lining them up so that one after the other are the works of God. It is by the word of God that he creates this. Vayomer Elohim, and God said, and God said, and God said. Psalm 33, verse 6 and 9, by the word of the Lord. So he spoke the word, And God doesn't need 24 hours, doesn't need 24 seconds, for Pete's sake. He could do it in just a snap like that.
Ken?
Can I comment? You know, God reveals to us in the Scriptures His Word. And there are certain rules of grammar and language in regard to Hebrew or Greek or whatever it is that we have to take. And if you apply those same rules as you do to days 4, 5, and 6, to day 1, 2, and 3, you have the word day for the days of creation, qualified by evening, qualified by morning, qualified by number. And, you know, I'd like Dr. Kaiser to tell me where else in the Old Testament evening and morning doesn't mean an ordinary day. I mean, if you take the rules of grammar and you apply Genesis 1 as Brown Diver Briggs did, which is a respected Lexington, by the way, and Kohler and Baumgartner as well, they're the examples of ordinary days. If you just take it as written, letting it speak to you, it's very obvious. I mean, God, what we should be looking at is this is God revealing to us what He did. He defines the word day on day 1. That's why it uses a cardinal number there, 1 day.
All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back,